He wasn't in a gang. He wasn't out there trying to prove anything. If anything, he tried to stay away from trouble. But sometimes fear doesn't save you when you just happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. On a late May morning in South LA, a young man with a mental disability showed up to a car wash wearing red sneakers. That's it, no disrespect, just red shoes. What happened next wasn't about territory or revenge. It was about ego, pride, a warped idea of respect. And by the time it was over, a mother was left replaying her son's final words in her head over and over again. Back in the day, you didn't have to guess. If you walked through certain blocks in South LA, it was right there in your face. Red on one side, blue on the other. Bandanas tied a certain way. T-shirts loud with meaning. Even the shoes and which ear was pierced could tell a story. The streets had uniforms, and everybody knew what they meant. But times changed. Once law enforcement started rolling out gang injunctions and building stronger cases with new legal tools, the culture shifted. Wearing your set on your sleeve became a liability. The streets went quieter, more low-key. It stopped being about what you showed and started being about what you hid. Detective Chris Barling of the Los Angeles Police Department, who has worked homicides in South LA for over 2 decades, keeps it simple. If someone was still walking around head to toe in gang colors, they were basically volunteering to get stopped by police. So most stopped doing it. These days, clothes do not always tell the full story. And that is exactly why what happened to 19-year-old Tavin Price hit so hard. It was May 29, 2015, around 11 in the morning. Nothing about the day felt different. Price, who stood just 4'10" and weighed barely 100 pounds, was at the 5-minute car wash on West Florence Avenue with his mother, Jennifer, and a family friend named Wade. Jennifer was in the back, focused on cleaning the vehicle. Wade stepped into the smoke shop at the front. Inside, a man named Dwight Smith approached her and asked for her number. She turned him down. That should have been the end of it. Wade walked out but came back moments later with Price. Now Price happened to be wearing red sneakers and a red t-shirt. Just red clothes, nothing more. But when Smith saw him, something shifted. He started posturing, measuring the young man up. He pointed out that he was 6 feet tall and made it clear he saw all that red. Then he started banging on him, pressing him with that question people in certain neighborhoods know carries weight. Wade and Price both tried to calm it down. They told him Price was from nowhere, street talk for not being affiliated. And it was the truth. Price was not in a gang. In fact, he was scared of them. Smith did not ease up. He told Price he would have to come out of his shoes. Wade stepped in again, shutting that down. He even explained that Price had a mental disability. To really understand the pain of this story, you have to know what Price had already survived. When he was just 3 years old, he was hit by a car and suffered a severe brain injury. Doctors told his parents he might never walk again. Somehow he fought back and regained mobility, but the injury left him with permanent mental disabilities. He lived with that reality every day. Smith's response was cold. He made it clear he did not care. The confrontation ended, at least on the surface. Price and Wade walked back toward the car wash. Wade got into the back seat. Price stood by the car, talking to his mom about what just happened. It felt like maybe it was over. 5 minutes later, gunshots ripped through the air. Jennifer spun around in disbelief, screaming that her son had just been shot. She ran after the shooter as he fled, but when she saw Price collapsing, she rushed back to him. In those final moments, as everything slipped away, he told her he did not want to die. Paramedics got there fast. Police followed. Price had been shot 3 times, twice in the chest and once in the arm. He did not survive. As the investigation began, the LAPD arrested a 27-year-old woman named Anthais Jarrett. She was held on $500,000 bail, facing charges of witness intimidation and conspiracy to commit murder. Detectives had surveillance footage and were chasing leads, but the actual gunman was still out there. Now, June 1st, 2015 was supposed to be a celebration. Tavin was about to turn 20. That's a milestone. That's cake, candles, jokes, music playing in the background. Instead, his sisters were standing on a sidewalk right by the pole near the spot where he took his last breath. No party, just pain. They taped up a poster covered in his pictures, smiling photos, fresh outfits, memories frozen in time. They tied happy birthday balloons to the pole and lit candle after candle until the sidewalk started glowing. One detail hit everybody who walked past. The name on the memorial read Tevin. His legal name had an A, but he always liked it spelled with an E. So that's how his sisters honored him, the way he wanted it. Around the neighborhood, people remembered him as the kid who stayed fly, always clean, always put together, and yeah, he loved his bright red shoes. That was just his style. But that block sits in territory long associated with the rolling 60s Crips, a set known for blue. In areas where turf lines are invisible but deadly, something as small as the wrong color can turn into a life or death situation. His family kept saying the same thing over and over. He was not in a gang. He never hurt anybody. That was not who he was. That evening around 6 p.m., people came together for a vigil, not just to mourn a headline, not just another statistic, but to remember a real person, a young man with a name, a family, and people who loved him. And in a city that's seen its share of gang violence, people were saying this one felt different, like a new low, cowardly, all over colors that don't even carry the same meaning they once did. What made it even heavier, even some people connected to the rolling 60s were quietly reaching out to the family. Tavin's sister, Runisha, said a few of them actually knew him. They told her straight up, this was senseless, no honor in it, no stripes earned. She described her brother as stylish, always outside, always on the move, but gentle, the kind of guy who wouldn't hurt a fly. His other sister said he was a mama's boy through and through, rarely left his mother's side. For years, that car wash near Crenshaw and Florence in Hyde Park had been a happy place for Tavin and his mom. Now it was candles and tears. His mother, Jennifer Rivers, stood there in dark tinted glasses while people hugged her and whispered words she probably wasn't even processing. She moved slowly, just nodding, like her body was there, but her mind was somewhere else entirely. You could see the weight on her face, and what haunts her most isn't the crowd or the funeral. It's that moment, his eyes rolling back, his hand gripping her arm, him begging her, saying he didn't want to die. That scene doesn't fade. It replays over and over. Now, whenever she closes her eyes, that's what she sees, his final moments. As the crowd slowly cleared out that night, Rivers looked drained, eyes barely open, body swaying from exhaustion. Another long night ahead. On June 13th, 2015, the mood inside the Angelus Funeral Home in Baldwin Hills was heavy. Rivers walked behind her son's black casket dressed in white. She moved slowly as the pallbearers carried it to the front. Family members rushed to steady her. When the casket opened, her cries filled the chapel. More than 200 people packed the room, gold and white ribbons pinned to jackets, single white roses in trembling hands. The ribbons carried two dates, the day he was born and the day he died. His brother James could not even look. He bent over the pew, shoulders shaking. A speaker reminded everyone that Tavin had already overcome so much in his short life. Pastor Francilia James challenged the street question that leads to so much bloodshed. When people ask where someone is from, the real answer is simple. From their mother's womb. That is where life begins, not on a corner. Amir Abdul Jalil, another interventionist, spoke about the cycle. One mother buries her son, another mother watches hers go to prison. Nobody wins. Representatives connected to Councilman Curran Price and Assemblyman Mike Gibson showed up in support. It was announced that both houses of the legislature would adjourn in Tavin's memory, a rare gesture that showed how far his story had reached. Jennifer had written words for her son, but could not read them herself. Her niece stepped in and read them to the room. She remembered his last birthday, the way he hugged her tight, and at the end of it all, beneath the tears and heartbreak, was a simple truth. He was her world, and now she has to learn how to live without him. By June 17, 2015, the pressure was building. That's when Los Angeles City Council member Bernard C. Parks stepped in and pushed for a $50,000 reward to help solve Price's murder. The idea wasn't complicated. Put real money on the table, make some noise, send a clear message. If you know something, now is the time to speak up. Anyone with information that led to an arrest and conviction would qualify for the payout. Parks understood something a lot of people don't. When a child is taken, there's no clean closure, no tidy ending. But justice is still a step that has to be taken. Tavin's mother, Rivers, held on to that hope. She believed maybe the reward would push somebody else's conscience a little harder. Maybe somebody out there just needed a reason to finally speak up. A few days later, on June 23, 2015, the case took a major turn. Murder charges were officially filed against 3 alleged gang members. Investigators identified the suspected gunman as Canasho Johns. He was tracked down outside Houston, Texas, and taken into custody. The plan was to extradite him back to Los Angeles to face the charges waiting on him. But it did not stop there. Dwight Kevin Smith and Kevin Dion Johnson, the 2 men accused of confronting Tavin over his red Chuck Taylors, had already been arrested. Both were charged with murder, sitting behind bars with bail set at over $2 million each. Then there was Anthese Jarrett. She had been arrested the same day as the shooting and was facing charges tied to conspiracy and witness intimidation. After the news broke that 4 suspects were finally in custody, Rivers just broke down, and you could understand why. While everyone else saw a headline, she was being forced to relive the worst moment of her life all over again, this time in front of cameras and microphones. For her, this wasn't a story that would trend for a few days and disappear. It was personal, it was permanent. And as the case inched closer to court, Jennifer made one thing very clear. She would be there. Every hearing, every court date, no matter what, she wasn't stepping back. Detective Chris Barling of the Los Angeles Police Department publicly thanked her for her relentless push. He acknowledged that her refusal to stay silent helped keep the case alive. In a division as busy as the 77th Street Division, cases can pile up, but this one never slipped into the background. Deputy Chief Scott emphasized that when something this severe happens, justice has to respond. There was still work ahead, but having the suspects in custody brought a measure of relief. Tavin's godmother, Marilyn Cedino, decided she would not let his name fade either. She began working on a nonprofit for kids called Why My Red Shoes. She wanted his story to mean something beyond tragedy. She described him as a sweet soul, a young man who did not ask for much, just love, just a simple future. After the cameras shut off and the microphones were packed away, Jennifer Rivers went somewhere quiet. She headed straight to the cemetery to tell her son about the arrest herself. While waiting for his permanent headstone to be finished, she placed a small white picket fence around his grave, a simple symbol of the peaceful life he once dreamed about. By January 2016, the system finally started moving. A judge ordered the 3 men, Canasho Johns, Dwight Kevin Smith, and Kevin Johnson, to stand trial for the murder of 19-year-old Tavin Price. On paper, it looked like progress. But to Tavin's mother, Jennifer Rivers, it felt like a slow walk through something she had already lived through. She didn't need a courtroom to tell her what happened. She was there. She saw it with her own eyes. Sitting through hearing after hearing felt less like justice and more like reliving a nightmare on repeat. By October 2016, the real showdown began. Johns and Johnson went to trial, but there was already a twist. Dwight Smith had folded back in August. He took a manslaughter plea and agreed to testify against the other 2. That move changed everything. Now the courtroom wasn't just about evidence. It was about loyalty, betrayal, and survival. Inside that downtown courtroom, the air stayed heavy. Rivers sat with her family as Deputy District Attorney Bobby Zumbarakis laid it out plain and simple. He told the jury this wasn't random. This was gang pride. Ego over life, reputation over reason. He came in confident, saying he had multiple witnesses, placing all 3 men at the scene. The jury even watched footage from a jailhouse informant where Johnson was allegedly heard talking about cutting security wires and what happened to the murder weapon. The prosecution wasn't playing, but the defense wasn't backing down either. Johnson's lawyer, Kurt Leftwich, painted a totally different picture. According to him, his client wasn't there to hurt anybody. He was just in the area getting a quote from an auto body shop. Leftwich even used the prosecution's own security footage to argue that when the confrontation started, Johnson wasn't involved. He said Johnson was across the street when shots rang out and ran because anybody with common sense runs when bullets start flying. Then there was Bill Jacobson, representing Johns. He zeroed in on one big issue. The shooter's face couldn't be clearly seen in the footage. Blurry video doesn't equal proof. That was his angle. And when it came to Dwight Smith, both defense attorneys sharpened their knives. If Smith took the stand, they were ready to tear him apart. In their eyes, Smith wasn't some brave truth teller. He was the real villain trying to save himself. The prosecution called 25 witnesses, building the timeline piece by piece. Their goal was clear: show exactly what happened and expose how deep the gang ties ran. But things got tense fast. Witnesses who had previously identified Johns as the shooter suddenly went quiet in court. Recorded interviews showed them speaking clearly before. Now, silence. Fear hung in the air. One witness admitted Johns told her to keep her mouth shut. Another pointed out known gang member sitting in the courtroom audience, watching every word. Zumbarakis didn't sugarcoat it. Gangs might control people, he told the jury, but they don't control evidence, and they don't control this courtroom. Then came Dwight Smith's testimony. He claimed he initially confronted Price to protect him, but his version of protection was twisted. He admitted telling Johns that Johnson should be the one to carry out the killing instead, saying he didn't want Johns to get caught up. Even his so-called intervention was dark. Smith also revealed the cost of cooperating. He had already been attacked twice in prison, once by Johns himself, because he chose to testify. He knew what being labeled a snitch meant. He said he would likely spend the rest of his life watching his back, but he couldn't sleep knowing a killer might walk free. The defense focused almost entirely on destroying Smith's credibility. Interestingly, neither attorney called a single witness of their own. Their strategy was simple. If Smith falls apart, the case falls apart. Meanwhile, detectives Fernando Cuevas and Eric Crossan brought in a mountain of surveillance footage: 4 angles from the car wash, 3 from the smoke shop, 2 from a nearby beauty shop. But then came the timestamp confusion. The car wash cameras had the correct time. The smoke shop cameras were off, but by how much? Cuevas said 1 hour slow. Crossan said 58 minutes. After reviewing everything carefully, the timeline landed in between: 59 minutes and 21 seconds slow. The beauty shop cameras were estimated to be 9 minutes off. Every timestamp moving forward was adjusted to real time. And when that timeline lined up, the movements told a story. Less than a minute after Rivers, Price, and Wade pulled into the car wash, Johns and Johnson rolled into the smoke shop lot in a black Lexus. Johnson went inside, bought a cigarette, and lingered. Then Wade walked past the Lexus. That's when Smith stepped out. He followed her inside, staying close. While she grabbed a drink, he leaned on a cooler, watching. Around that same time, Price, easy to spot in red, walked toward the entrance. Smith moved to the doorway and stared directly toward Price for 31 straight seconds. Wade spoke briefly with Johnson, then Smith. Jarrett walked in, glanced her way. Smith circled back to Johnson. Then Smith and Jarrett stood at the doorway, pointing toward the car wash entrance multiple times. A minute later, Wade came back into the shop with Price. Smith immediately returned to the doorway, gesturing toward the ground as he talked. Johnson stood 5 or 6 feet away, smoking, watching everything. After Wade paid, she and Price walked back to the car wash, but behind them things were shifting. Smith and Johnson exchanged words. Johnson left, got into the Lexus, turned onto Florence Avenue, drove east, then turned north just past the car wash. Smith lingered, watching Rivers clean the car with Price nearby. He spoke briefly with his cousin, Letitia Poole, then suddenly jogged north, crossing Florence and disappearing up 11th Avenue. As he ran, Poole pulled out 2 cell phones, watching him closely before heading back inside. Every move mattered. During closing arguments, Leftwich went hard. He said the real person who should be on trial was Dwight Smith. According to him, Smith blamed others because he couldn't blame himself. He even suggested Smith ordered Johnson to shoot. But the prosecution had Johnson's own police interview transcript, where Johnson admitted Smith didn't have that kind of authority. Zumbarakis did something smart. He agreed Smith wasn't a saint. He told the jury plainly, Smith isn't someone you trust with your kids, but his testimony wasn't the whole case. It was just a guide. The evidence stood on its own. When the case finally went to the jury, it didn't take long, less than 3 hours. Guilty on all counts for both Johns and Johnson. Johns was also convicted of being a felon in possession of a firearm. The jury confirmed the gang and gun enhancements were true. Smith had already taken his deal, but the moment the verdicts were read, that's when everything shifted. The courtroom got real. Johnson dropped his head instantly. He couldn't even look at his lawyer. You could see it all over him. Johns, whole different vibe. He smirked. Then, like the cameras weren't even there, he started taking off his tie and dress shirt right in the middle of the courtroom. Jennifer Rivers wasn't surprised. She later said that same smirk had been on his face since day one, no remorse, no regret, just that look. She believed time would eventually erase it. And by November 2016, that's exactly what happened. That day was sentencing, the final chapter for Johns and Johnson in the killing of Tavin Price. Everyone in that room felt it. This was the end of the road, or at least the start of a very long one. Right before the judge began to speak, Johns asked if he could address the court. For a split second, you could feel the tension shift. Maybe this was it. Maybe he was about to show some humanity, maybe an apology. He didn't. Instead, he turned toward the gallery, toward his people, and made it clear he believed he was going to be just fine. And just like that, the room changed. That one moment lit a match. His sister shouted out in support. Tavin's family wasn't about to sit there quiet. They fired back. Voices clashed. Emotions boiled over. And then Jennifer Rivers snapped. This was the mother who watched her son die in front of her. The mother who replayed that night every time she closed her eyes. When Johns looked at her like she didn't matter, like her pain was nothing. That was it. She jumped to her feet. It took her own family and a bailiff to physically hold her back from charging toward Johns' supporters in the back of the courtroom. The grief wasn't quiet anymore. It was loud. It was raw. Later, she made it clear what pushed her over the edge. The disrespect. The way he sat there, bold, like he hadn't taken a life. Before everything spiraled, Rivers had taken the stand. She looked those men in the eyes and spoke from a place only a grieving mother can reach. She reminded them they still had children out there who cared about them, children who would still get to see them someday. She said she would never see her son again. All she had left were funeral pictures. That kind of pain hits different. Other family members stepped up too, talking about who Tavin really was. Not a headline, not a statistic, a son, a cousin, a friend. They talked about the ripple effect, how one reckless act didn't just take one life. It cracked open multiple families at once. Even Judge Charlene Olmedo had something to say before sending those men away. She told them they probably didn't fully understand the damage they caused. Maybe not now, but maybe one day, when they're older, sitting alone with their thoughts, it would finally sink in. They didn't just ruin their own futures. They shattered their families too. When court resumed after the chaos, the energy shifted. It was time. 50 years in prison for both Johns and Kevin Dion Johnson. And because Johns was the one prosecutors said pulled the trigger back in May 2015, he got an extra 3 years for being a felon in possession of a firearm. The jury had already confirmed the gang and gun allegations were true. That was a crushing blow for the defense. But none of this happens without the third man in the story, Dwight Smith. Smith took a plea deal. He admitted to manslaughter. And most importantly, he testified against Johns and Johnson. That cooperation got him 12 years in state prison. It was a gamble. Smith had already been beaten in jail. Being labeled a snitch follows you, but he still took the stand. Jennifer Rivers actually thanked him. She understood what it cost him. She said in the end he did the right thing. She prayed he would get protective custody because she knew the danger didn't end with testimony. The defense tried to argue for a new trial. The judge shut that down immediately. She said the evidence wasn't just enough. It was more than sufficient. But the hardest part of the day came when Jennifer Rivers spoke again. She had watched her son get shot. She heard his last words. He wasn't a gang member. He wasn't in the streets. He was just her son. She told the court she cries every single day, that she's haunted by the way he looked at her, asking if he was going to be all right, saying he couldn't breathe, saying it hurt. She showed up to court in a red t-shirt with justice written across it in silver. Red tennis shoes too, her son's favorite color. She said she believes her son is looking down, smiling now that justice has been served. But she also admitted something no parent should ever have to say. She wished the shooter had aimed at her instead. She asked people to keep her family in their prayers. She described her pain as unbearable, the kind that doesn't fade when the cameras leave. When it came to the sentence, she didn't sugarcoat her feelings. She would have preferred the death penalty. She said she didn't even think they deserved prison. But in the end, she was satisfied that they would spend decades behind bars. It wasn't her son back. It wasn't peace, but it was accountability.